What's up, everybody, and welcome to another how-to episode with myself, Anne Mahlum. Today, we are really excited to have a guest here today that's going to teach you guys all about negotiation. Mori Taheripour is a globally recognized and highly sought-after speaker, award-winning educator, and negotiation expert who has worked with some of the most iconic sports leagues and Fortune 100 corporations over the past 20 years. And Mori is going to talk to you guys all about how to bring yourself to a negotiation, something that is a very powerful tool to learn. Mori, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
I am. Thank you for having me. Very excited about the conversation.
Yeah, me too. At first, we could just start out, like most people do, and give everybody a little bit of background about yourself and how you got so passionate and to be such an expert in this topic.
So I kind of stumbled upon teaching, to be honest with you. This was definitely not something I had imagined I'd be doing at this point in my life or ever in my life, to be honest. I was about to graduate from the Wharton School, and my then negotiations professor, now dear friend and mentor, had said, maybe while you're trying to sort of figure out what's next for you, and you should maybe consider teaching. And it didn't even seem like an option to me at the time because I'm an introvert, could not even imagine standing in front of a classroom, talking to 10 people, much less groups of people or what have you. Public speaking was definitely not my thing. But I had been really sort of passionate about the class anyway. And I think if I think back to why that was and why that I was so excited about the class and why I became so excited about the subject, and probably just from my own sort of life experiences and maybe because I hadn't negotiated for myself or really exercised my voice. And I found that many of the things that sort of I regretted in life, which is truly something I try not to do anymore because the what ifs and the I should haves could really kill you. But I realized that it was a lot of the conversations that I had decided not to have, protecting other people, sort of leaving my own interests behind and taking a back seat to other people's interests and wants and needs, specifically sort of family and parents. But I think if I think about it, it happened in other parts of my life as well. So negotiation sort of became this tool that gave me a voice that allowed me to sort of use to sort of speak my truth, if you will, and to do it in a way that wasn't damaging, that didn't damage relationships, that wasn't disrespectful. And when I really found those conversations and I was able to sort of engage in them successfully and fearlessly, to be honest, it felt very liberating. It felt really empowering. Like there was really nothing to fear. Actually, the fear of having missed out in retrospect was much bigger than actually having those really hard conversations. So it became sort of the thing that I was really passionate about. And I used my own experiences and sort of mistakes and challenges as the opportunity to teach other people, specifically my students at Wharton. And I fell in love, to be honest. I've never looked back. It's now going on to 20 years, but it is definitely an empowering tool that has helped me incredibly in my life and has, I think, made me a better academic instructor as a result.
Yeah, I mean, Mori's being humble, you guys. She's a 9-time Teacher of the Year over at Wharton. So you're obviously doing something great and well to be able to not just teach, but help people learn how to do this skill set. And when you think of the word negotiation, Mori, I mean, I want to get into gender stuff as well with you, but it feels like such a male masculine term to negotiate. But all negotiation is, in my mind at least, is advocating for yourself.
Right.
And you're right. Like when you hear the word negotiation, at least for me, I think people think of business. They think of like salary or like something to do with money, but we negotiate all the time for things that have nothing to do with money. Can you sort of get into the different categories, for you of what that means and how things made different in terms of approach for different categories?
Yeah, I'll start with that comment that you made, which is what I think is really unfortunate because it does keep people back a lot from negotiating or creates the anxiety and the fear, which is we equate it with really sort of masculine traits. And I don't mean it in a gendered kind of a way, but I just mean like, sort of the aggressive, the in your face, contentious, sort of almost a bullying type of a personality. And most people don't fall into that category. In fact, everybody's very different anyway, but some of our values don't align with that. So I think that people think if I'm not that person, then I can't possibly be successful. And the truth is that those are just the examples that we see in the media and society. But, there are plenty of other examples that show us something different, right? Diplomats, for example, do not sort of use that as their approach to negotiations. We'd be in all out war on a regular basis, right? So I think that that's sort of one of these commonly held misperceptions that we have to sort of really address, because unfortunately, again, it holds people back and it doesn't allow them to see how they can be successful. To sort of further that, we do negotiations all the time. We are engaged in negotiations from, minute we wake up in the morning to the time we go to sleep at night, with friends, with family members, with our pets, in driving, making decisions, at work, so it can be everything from personal conversations all the way to business conversations. And given that, most people are actually very skilled, highly experienced negotiators. It's just that they haven't seen those conversations as being negotiations. And that's in fact exactly what they are, because negotiations is simply a conversation, right? It's problem solving. It's making critical decisions. It's trying to get to a place that's better than where you were an hour ago, 2 hours ago, and handle some of these sort of maybe touchy subjects, or really things like figuring out where you're going to go on vacation with your spouse, and the give and take. These are all negotiations, right? So and as a result of that, how I approach the subject is, very early in the class, I say, please understand that when I say negotiations, I don't mean business or personal. I don't mean somebody you know or somebody you don't know. Because quite frankly, the skill set is exactly the same. The strategies are exactly the same. What changes may be the emotionality or the connection that we have to something. When something maybe is more meaningful to us, we tend to sort of lean in harder or fight for it more. But outside of that, or some people think I have a much harder time negotiating with people that I know because I'm a pleaser, or that I don't want to rock the boat and I want to preserve this relationship, or vice versa. I'd rather negotiate with somebody I know because I know that more about them. They're not a complete stranger. There's less sort of ambiguity there. So it's all really the same. I think it's the stories that we tell ourselves that makes us think that, to negotiate one way is very different than to negotiate another way. Really our connection to it, or how much we're invested in it.
Yeah, and we negotiate with ourselves all the time. Like we do that too. Like we know when we are. It's like, wait, why am I allowing myself to even have this negotiation
Right.
with whether I'm gonna work out today? No, I'm not. And you have these two different personalities, and it's interesting to be like, who won today? Who did I
Right.
let? How did they win? What strategy did they use to
Right.
get to go to the gym when I didn't want to go?
Right.
Super super fascinating, and I think that you're right. And just like most things, I talk a lot about money with people too, and there's a lot of limiting beliefs around, of course, money. And I'm sure with negotiation, and you already hit on some of them, Maury, as well, of like, well, I'm not successful because like I'm not mean, I'm not aggressive. Like those traits are not ones that I have or want to whatever. Therefore, that's why, I'm not going to push for more money or advocate for myself because I don't want to seem pushy. We have these negative association with some of these words, and we think people who are really good at those things are manipulative or
Mm.
whatever the word is. So we're just like, well, I'm not good at that because I'm not a bad person.
Right.
And again, when you're talking, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of alignment here with money. When people demonize or money and like, well, I'm not greedy, I just don't need a lot to be happy. And do you see that a lot of people have this? Well, I'm just not a good negotiator because I'm a good person.
Yeah, and they think that they're weak as a result, right? I mean, when I talk about sort of the importance of empathy in negotiations, there's literally people that say, well, doesn't empathy mean weakness? And, I'm sort of, it kind of stops me in my tracks, because I think, first of all, where are we in our world where empathy has become weakness?
Mhm.
Where empathy is really, as I understand it, it's really sort of being able to walk in somebody else's shoes, right? To so deeply understand somebody, or be so curious about somebody that it's actually, if you think about it from an even opportunistic perspective, it's much more strategic than to not be that way, right? Because you are delving into this person's psyche almost. You're trying to see what moves them, how you can connect to them. And so I think that it's sort of, again, I hate to do this, but what society has done is sort of trigger some of these emotions, right? even as far as sort of the gender conversation goes. Literally, when a woman wants to be more assertive, right, in self-advocacy, many people associate that with not assertive, but aggressive, right? And so the self-advocacy becomes almost a negative thing. Whereas the truth is, if you don't negotiate for yourself, if you don't protect yourself, if you don't speak up for yourself, who will? And so we have every right to do that. And it doesn't have to be done in a way that turns people off. It doesn't have to be in a way that you're in somebody's face. There is room for conversations that don't go that direction. In fact, the most successful negotiations don't end up that way, right? They are conversations. There may be misunderstanding, but that doesn't mean it's all out war. It just means, okay, so let's tackle this in a way that, and this as a businesswoman, you don't want to burn the bridge down, right? You want to look at this conversation in a way that brings you business in perpetuity, strengthens relationships. I mean, that's where we benefit. So I don't know how these sort of these myths have been so sort of hammered into our heads that now they've become many people's reality. What I do know is that when we look at the gender pay gap, when we look at people not getting promoted at work, or women not getting funding for their companies, I know for a fact that it's some of these things that actually create the fear and the anxiety, and in fact make people say, I don't have a seat at this table, or I really shouldn't have this conversation.
Let's get into the steps. That's really good stuff. So again, whenever I talk with folks about money, I always go into emotions first. And I'm like, what is your mindset around it? What's your emotion when you hear these words? Because we have to start there to figure out if it's like, oh my God, I'm so feared of rejection, someone telling me no. And I've been the one negotiating, and I've obviously been the one being negotiated with lots of times, whether with employees for salary, for compensation, with private equity, with men, with women, with different ages, you sort of name it. So if someone comes to you just like, oh my God, I'm so bad at negotiating, or I don't even know where to begin, where do you start with people?
Well, one, I mean, really, literally, the first part of the class is to remind them that this is something that they've done always, right? Since the time they were little, right? And in fact, kids are actually pretty great negotiators. But once you do that, and it's almost this immediate sense of confidence that sort of they gain. And it's strange to see. And it's actually pretty fun as an educator, because I don't know how many other classes that are taught where you can see your students change immediately. I see that, right? And then the other thing that I do very early on is also say, to understand yourself is really important, because what you want to do is establish who you are, what your values are, which I think are non-negotiables, right? The moment you sort of give up those things that constitute your every being, which are our values, the things that we stand by, that once you understand that, then now you have this really great foundation to go by, right? Because if you think about all the times maybe that you or anybody that I've talked to that have said, the outcome of the negotiations was actually pretty good, but I hated myself for it. I hated the way I acted. I hated the way I conducted myself. And so it's actually negotiations I can't even celebrate. And the reason why that happens is because you didn't really firmly understand yourself or honor exactly who you are authentically. And the things that were meaningful to you, those are the things that you champion for. And those are not always in the form of money or material things. It just means, sort of my foundation as a human being. So, I always say first and foremost, that's what you have to do. It's this inner work that is messy and hard and difficult. And this sounds like therapy, but it actually is. It's like until you clear out those cobwebs and do this sort of emotional hygiene, that I actually don't think that we can be better negotiators, because we're not dealing with some of those inner demons that actually hold us back, like imposterism, right? Not understanding your self-worth, not understanding your value. Well, if you don't understand those things, and that's sort of your life's work, then how on earth are you going to be convincing somebody else of your value, right? If you don't believe in yourself, how is somebody else going to give you a promotion to lead other people? Like this is not going to happen. So I think what I would say that the very first step, even when you're, heading into your sort of preparation process for any negotiations, is check in with yourself and know that you've sort of addressed some of these things, because without them, I just don't think that you have a really sort of, again, that strong foundation with which you can tackle some of these, harder conversations, or have the courage or the fearlessness to go into these conversations.
So it sounds like it's not just being practically prepared with information, but also emotionally prepared. And, I'll be a little vulnerable and tell, if you guys from the standpoint, I didn't have imposter syndrome, but I have some deep rooted thing that I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. And sometimes that shows up in an ugly way in a negotiation where I'm like, that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
That's some stuff that happened in my past that I automatically assume that I can't trust you. You're trying to take from me.
Right.
And that doesn't make for like the best version of myself at a negotiation table. And again, I've had that thing happen too, where we're like, oh, I actually got the thing, but like you kind of feel like you need a shower afterward.
Right.
Really my best self in the way that I made that happen.
Right.
And where do I need to reflect that like that wasn't about that person or that situation, and I can get to that result in a different manner that's going to make me feel better about myself.
Yeah, and to your point, you don't want to be addressing those issues at the negotiation table, right?
Mhm.
Like, you wanted to have addressed those things well ahead of time. And hopefully this is, again, that's why I said it's your life's work, because it's not just negotiations that those things affect. It's your relationships, it's your job, your success, your happiness, right? So I think that because so much of the books that we read or classes that are taught are so sort of deeply involved in like your tactics and your strategy, and really sort of these, if you say this, they will do that. But I think there's so much more to it. And again, because this is a subject that creates so much fear and anxiety, I think you have to address why it's creating that fear and anxiety first, right?
Mhm.
Before you learn about any tactics and strategy. And I think the way I teach those things are really sort of married to one another, because I don't think you can do one without the other. And I want people to feel a sense of competence that's really deep, as opposed to I memorized what I'm supposed to say and I
Mhm.
memorized it really well. I rather people say, you know what, my intuition, my gut instinct tells me that I can actually navigate this pretty well. And I'm at the point where if they ask me a question and I don't really want to answer it, I'm not going to try to remember what it said on page 67 of a book, but I'm
Mhm.
going to do this in a way that taps into my, again, my values, my gut instinct, my emotional intelligence. And those are things that you don't pick up from a book necessarily. It's things that are sort of, it's so much at your core. So I
Yeah.
think if that all has to be done, and then it's the other stuff, or at least they should run a parallel path.
Yeah, and it's just interesting. Most things in life, right, does come down to emotions and how we make people feel. One of the best negotiation books, and it's not meant to be a negotiation book, but it's How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And it's like, this is how you treat people and you make them comfortable. And one of the skill sets of negotiating so many leases with Solid Core, I was like, what is important to the landlord?
Right.
And I remember many conversations where landlords would say to me, that's just not the way that it's done, or we've never done that before. And I'm like, I understand that. And that probably makes you feel nervous. Let me tell you why I'm asking for it.
Right.
And sometimes I've seen it and I've done it too, because we all get caught up in the game. We negotiate for the sake of negotiating. And I'm like, this isn't even important to me. Like, I need to explain why rent abatement, why giving me 6 months free rent is going to help me succeed, which is better for them.
Right.
I need to explain, why I need more tenant improvement dollars, which is money a landlord gives you upfront to build out the space. I didn't have a lot of cash in the beginning, and like
Right.
every $1,000 mattered for me to put in the business to grow it, which is only going to benefit the relationship with the landlord if this place stays open for 10 years. So anyway, it was just like, what's important to you and why, and here's why this is important to me. And I found that like that transparency, you talked about values in the beginning, that became a really important value of mine and a really effective tool of like, I just put all my cards on the table
Right.
and I tell you everything that you might need to know out of hopes that you'll trust that I'm being honest with you. And it was super effective when you can get somebody to push of like, tell me why you're asking for that. Well,
Right.
you just always get that. And I'm like, I
Right.
don't understand. That's not a reason that I can like comprehend. Can you be more specific? So something
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I think that's really important, Nan. And I think, that's, again, it goes back to the preparation piece of this, because I think a lot of times we're like, okay, what's my goal? What I want out of this. And really this notion of just being really curious is sort of not sort of paid attention to enough. Like I always tell my students, think about the questions you want to ask, because it's really important to get to the heart of what it is that they want as well. And I don't mean just more money, but if they're going to sell the building, for example, and they're your landlord, right? And in 6 years, this is it. They're going to sell all the real estate assets. Then telling them that you're going to be a tenant for 15 years is probably not going to matter to them very much. But to understand sort of, well, if they're going to look to sell this building in sort of 6 years, maybe the improvement that you make in your facility, or you know what I mean? Like sort of to be able to anchor in the things that matter to them and not just matters to you, I think is really important. But you have to be incredibly curious about those things and come into these conversations knowing that, you're going to lead with curiosity, not certainty, because that sort of bit of humility in saying to yourself, I'm not going to know everything. So to be able to get to a place that matters to them and matters to me, I'm going to have sort of this learning mindset and really ask the questions that matter. And then, another great point you made was, and explain to them your why, right? When you do that for people, then you sort of bring them on board, right? That's sort of, like persuasion 101, right? And so get them to invest in it, right? Get them to be intentional about how they're going to work with you. By letting them understand more about you, more about the things that you want, more about how you're going to pursue success, which in this way is going to be meaningful for them and meaningful for you. So I think we underplay those things. And I think a lot of times we want to just go in and be so confident and I know what I'm going to say and I know exactly what I want, that we don't leave space for that learning. And I think a lot of times we actually end up in a much better place at the end that maybe we even imagined by just learning.
Yeah, let's go through an example, because I'm sure the number one thing probably people think about when negotiating is their pay, their compensation. So what, if I come to you and I'm like, Mori, oh God, gosh, I'm 20 grand apart from where I want to be and where my employer is, and I have a meeting, face-to-face meeting with the person to have this discussion. How do you prepare me? What are some things that I can go in there to best arm myself, to give myself the best chance to get what I want?
Yeah, I would go back to you have to explain to them the whys, right? What it is that you want. And generally, I think when people ask for a salary increase, what they really want is to be valued. And we're valued by more than just money, right? So the first thing I tell people is, why is it that this is the time that you're doing this? Is it just more money for now? Or if that's the case, it's a little risky, because if that's all you're focused on, the person sitting across from you could easily say, we can't afford it. And that's the end of the conversation, right? So that's why we look at sort of compensation from a package perspective, right? What are all the other things that are also important to you? And what are you going to be doing in 3 years or 5 years from now, that this is the moment that it matters, and taking whatever sort of, whether it's, again, you're looking for the salary bump, maybe it's a promotion, maybe it's a change in title, maybe it's that you want to go back to school and you want actually for them to support the prep classes that you want to go through, or the evening classes that you want to take. So there's an academic stipend that you get. So I think to just think in the here and now is a mistake, but really to extend that out and say, where do I want to be? So the conversation that I have today is going to put me well on my way to do that. And I think then people realize it's more than just salary, right? I'm not saying the money is important. I'm just saying that it's not everything. There are other things that matter as well. And sometimes they're easier for them to say yes to than a $20,000 sort of difference in where they are and where you are in terms of the salary bump, right? So I think that's really important. The second thing is you're doing some self-advocacy here, right? You have to tell them what you've done, how you've succeeded, what are your accomplishments. And, I think that especially people who struggle with sort of, again, not having this sense of self-worth, a really strong sense of self-worth, we haven't taken inventory of the great things that we've achieved, right? Where sort of this notion of, I don't want to be boastful, or I don't want to be, I want to maintain this sense of sort of humility. Well, where it gets you in trouble is that you forget that you're actually as great as you are. You forget all the things that you've done that maybe that you've even underestimated, but it's very meaningful. So, taking that inventory, and I always tell people, keep a journal throughout the way, right? Don't even wait until that conversation to have this information. Every time you accomplish something at work that's noteworthy, every time you get a project completed before sort of the deadline, or you saved money on the budget, or whatever it is, note it, right? Write it down, because it's going to come in handy when you're actually going to be making these, sort of having these conversations. The other part of this is that the approach is generally like, I'm going to go and have this conversation with the person and they're going to say no. So that immediately creates the sense of it's me against you. But, usually the person sitting across from you is going to have to then take that conversation to somebody else, and be it HR, be it their CFO, be it whoever it is, and say, I need X amount of money for this employee. Well, that means that they are now your advocate, right? So this conversation should be treated in a way that they can tell your story in your absence. So they're not your arch enemy. They're actually the person that you want to make sure that they're so keenly aware of your whys and why you deserve this, why now, why here, that they can then communicate that meaningfully to the person that is ultimately going to be writing that check for you.
I love that. You need to get that person on your side. You need to get them advocating with you instead of, listen, I met with Anne today and she still wants $20,000 more. I told her no, but I told her I'd ask. That's not something you're making it really easy for this person above him or her to be like, well, then tell her no.
Right. We're not giving this to anybody else. Well, and so you have to really, this is not contention. This is really sort of getting somebody to understand, again, why you're asking for this and why they should give it to you, right? Why they should work with you to get you to be at a place where you feel ultimately valued and happy and wanting to stay, especially if you're an important employee to the company.
Yeah. As add on that, or I feel, sorry to interrupt, if you'll let me, just somebody, again, being on the receiving end of some people asking for impact, I can tell you what's worked on me. And it's exactly what you just said, which is when someone comes, and I tell you what doesn't work on me, when someone has come to me and said, I just need to make more money, or I want to make more money, I say, that's not really my problem. But if a person comes in and says, here's the value I've added to the business, and you speak to me in a financial sense of, listen, the business has grown 12% since I got into this role. We've added this, utilization has done this, blah, blah, blah. And you can show and speak, and you actually understand your financial impact to the business instead of, well, I work hard. I'm like, working hard is table stakes. There's no, if you're not working hard, you wouldn't have a job here. But knowing how to articulate your impact in a specific way. And that's why I love the journal recommendation of writing down the wins and understanding as much as you can about the finances of the business that you work for and how your job makes that impact. People always say, well, how do I do that in HR? Well, gosh, if you're hiring people in HR and you have, taken turnover from 32% to 25%, turnover is really expensive, in a business. You've just saved, again, you can Google some of these things and see how much savings 8% of turnover does for you. But that shows me you're thinking about the business and not just that you would like, more money without well, what's in it for the business? Right. It's really smart to do that.
Yeah. And I really love the fact that you talked about sort of this turnover piece, because a lot of people during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, were like, well, I can't possibly ask for a raise now. And I thought, well, actually this may be the best time, because you're now doing the job of 4 other people because they got furloughed. And so now your story actually makes a lot of sense. And even today, I mean, the economy that we're in, yes, there were all these tech layoffs and all the rest of it. Companies are looking for really good people, and they're looking for really good people that will stay, because turnover rate, again, is very expensive, right? And so there's no reason why the state of the economy keeps you back from having these conversations. So don't tell yourself those stories, right? Don't talk yourself out of it. Instead say, well, why is it actually maybe even easier now, right? What's going on in the state of the industry that will actually help me make this argument better? And I think a lot of times it's easier for us, just because of our fear, to look for the, well, I can't possibly, than say, you know what, why not, right? There's greater possibility maybe right now than ever. Let me actually tell that story, and let me look for all the reasons why. And I think I just want people to know that, because I think that they get very afraid, and understandably so, because of sort of where we are, where we have been. Times of chaos are really hard. But when we let, again, fear and anxiety hold us back from these opportunities, I think only then will we actually be hurting ourselves more than anybody else again. that gender pay gap doesn't come out of nowhere. I mean, these
Right.
things do catch up with you over time.
So let's talk about that for a second. Do you notice a difference in how either men and women negotiate or how people respond to men versus women, or is it both?
I think it's actually both because fundamentally negotiations is communications, right? And we communicate differently. So as a result, we're going to negotiate differently, right? And I frankly think that women have a lot of the traits and the characteristics that make us far better negotiators if we leaned into them more. We are more relationship oriented, right? We are far more sort of, and these are all generalizations, so forgive that, but more emotionally intelligent, right? We are far more concerned about other people's needs and wants so that we pay attention to those things, which makes it actually really strategic. Ethics, comes into play, all these things. So the fact that people think, well, women are not made for this, we absolutely are made for it. It's just that we sort of talked ourselves out of it. And that's important to know because we don't make these things up either, right? It's not a figment of our imagination. There absolutely is a social cost to negotiating for women. And part of that are sort of these gender roles that society has made for us, right? So again, the asking for something that we want rather than being sort of goal driven and being very sure of sort of the track that you want to be on and where you want to go. People say, oh, she was very aggressive about this, right? We can't change those things, unfortunately, and maybe over time, some of these things will fall off and maybe there'll be more equality and equity the way that people see men and women. But those things are pretty deeply ingrained. And I think that there's particularly sort of, studies that are done where if there's greater ambiguity in whether you can even ask for a raise, it's that women actually kind of pull themselves back. They're less likely to ask than men are, right? So we need sort of perfect clarity. We need to know that there's an opportunity, just like we need to know that we can even apply for a job that we are perfectly suited for, but maybe don't have all the qualifications for, whereas men are like, oh, I'm perfectly qualified for this, right? So there's that sense of confidence, or that kind of confidence gap, if you will, that also holds us back. So these things do exist, right? And what do we do as a result of it? I think that it's foolish to think you're going to change everybody's opinion of you in the here and now. It's not going to happen. And I think to put all your energy into wanting to do that is sort of misdirecting where your energy really should go, which is journaling your accomplishments, knowing how to tell your story, showing up in a way that again is not putting you in a place of I'm going to go in there and fight for this, but really saying I'm going to go into this conversation. I'm going to be perfectly present. I'm going to be very mindful. I'm going to ask these questions. I'm going to connect in a way with this person that will actually make them want to have this conversation with me. I think that's really reasonable. And I think that's who women are. But there are all these forces that have kept us from wanting to sort of take that step or feeling that it's very risky. Again, I don't want people to think that I'm saying this is not something that really exists. It absolutely does. What can you do about it? And I just feel like the minute we let our actions be dependent on what other people think as opposed to where our strengths are, that's when we've lost. And it's really important to sort of redirect where you put that energy.
Yeah. Speaking of, I'll give a shout out to my VP of legal, or my former, because I don't work anymore at Solidcore. She's young and her name is Dimple, and Dimple is a killer negotiator, and she leans into her feminine traits so well. She does not raise her voice. She speaks clearly. She listens. She's kind. She lets there be silence. And she's really effective at it. There's no screaming. There's no yelling. There's no jumping up and down. It's really amazing to watch. And how good she has gotten over the years of articulating a position, and just like the empathy side of, I hear where you're coming from. That still doesn't work for us. I really appreciate you trying to make this work. I know you have your business points and we have ours, and it would be really disappointing if we can't get there, but I'll understand. And it's just like, okay, that was really nice. Can I get a little bit? And all of a sudden you're this far away, and now the person either comes a little bit closer, and it's like, well, we're not going to walk away from something now. We're 2% apart or something like that. But she just continues to be patient, to be calm in her presence, and you can't rattle her. It's really effective.
And think about how rational that is, right? Like, wouldn't you rather be negotiating with, having a relationship with, being friends with, whatever it is, fill in the gaps, and with somebody like that, as opposed to somebody who's going to come in and be in your face and be aggressive and be pushy. So in a lot of ways, I don't even understand why we've given those traits so much power, because I'm like, who likes that? Like, how is that appealing? It really isn't. And women have this sort of sense of elegance that,
Yeah.
when used, it's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I fell in that trap too. And seeing, I think solid core was such an emotional thing for me. And it's just like, I'm like, I need Dimple on the phone because she's my yin to my yang, and I'm much more calm when she's around. I need that while I learn what she has. And so, yeah, super effective. How important is body language?
Very. I think that, we say a lot without saying anything sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's how you're communicating, sort of your emotions or your thoughts to people, then, they're going to pick up on these things, right? And they're going to, and especially when your words are not matching your body language, right? Like you're saying everything's okay, and yet you're sweating, right? Or you're sitting really uncomfortably. You don't look very peaceful, but you're saying, oh yeah, everything's okay. The people pick up on those things, and especially in those instances, it's now confusing, right? So which one is it, right? So I think that to be aware of your body language is really, really important. Leverage, for example, the way we show power, the way we hold power, is very much reflective of our entire being, because it's very much perception based. So people will think you have leverage if you walk in and you look confident. They'll think you have no leverage if you walk in and you look absolutely scared and look like you don't really want to even be there. And so when you know that, then you're like, you know what, I should pay more attention to these things. Like my confidence is directed by the way I carry myself. People call it power poses, whatever you want to call it. But sitting up when you sit down, looking like you should be here, you're telling them, you're signaling to them, I belong. Whereas if you look like you want to just slip under the table, you're saying something else. What's I think really important to note about that is that we are so not present in our lives. We are so distracted, and our attention span is sort of dwindling as we speak, that we are not even aware of our body language sometimes. We're not aware of what we're signaling, nor are we actually as emotionally present and intelligent as we should be, because again, we're being pulled in 10 million different directions. So yes, body language is important. What's even more important is to be really mindful and being really present and really thinking there's no other conversation that's more important than this one right now, so that you can actually be aware of your body language.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, being on the receiving end of some of this stuff and noticing some differences, gendered or not, but it's the directness, it's the pausing, it's the eye contact. Lots of, unfortunately, women, when I have negotiated, it's beating around the bush, so uncomfortable to ask the question out of fear of rejection or fear. And, again, my own sort of conversations with women, fear of asking for too much, fear of looking ungrateful, fear of all of these things. And, so we dance around it to look polite, and it's almost uncomfortable for both people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And why? Right. I don't, it's painful, first of all, to see. And I just feel like the person sitting across from you you'll fare far better if you come across as being confident. And confidence, again, could mean asking questions, or, it doesn't mean that you know everything. It doesn't mean that you have to be, so sure of everything that you're saying. I mean, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, you know what, let me find out. Because I see people getting into trouble by either lying or saying too much because they don't want to look like they don't know. Whereas I'm like, had you just said, I need a little time, actually, that's taking your power back, because you're saying, we're going to take this in a way that's going to work for me as well. And I'm not ready to answer your question right now. And I think that's actually a really powerful statement. But we make up these stories, Anne, in our head that, frankly, if you think about it, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. So why have we bought into all this stuff? I don't know.
Yeah. And I would even say practice. Everybody, I was like, how do you get good? I'm like, how do you get good at anything? You got to get the reps. You got to, do some role play with people of have them just say, no, we can't afford it. What's your rebuttal to that? What are the common rebuttals you're going to get and how you're going to approach that? Going in there with a specific number, which is helpful, but no one gets good at, no one that you see that is amazing at something just was always amazing. It took lessons, reading, educating, practice in order to get there. And gosh, what a skill to like take the effort and time to learn, right? As you said,
Absolutely.
we self-negotiate, we personally negotiate, we professionally, it happens all day, every single day. It sounds, I mean, obviously very much worth investing in to figure out the right skill sets to be able to put yourself in the best position possible.
Yeah, I think practice is really important. I think even asking people, if I go in and say this to my boss, I'm trying to get sort of a higher salary or I'm trying to get a promotion. Let me just practice on you. This is what I really want to say. This is what I want to say. How does it sound to you? And I think that having sort of that audience really is important for, especially for people that are sort of lacking that confidence or not sure of
Right.
how they want to say this, why they want to say this. And part of the reason why that's important is because the way we see something may be very different than the way somebody else sees something. And the way we want to be received may not be the way they'll receive us. And so, again, that's actually also, in addition to the practice, it's a great way to do this because you're like, did you actually get what I was trying to say, right? Did you understand? And a lot of times we'll see that there's a very big gap between what we thought we were
Yeah.
saying and how they actually received it, right? And so to expand that sort of ability and opportunity to see how you're being received by other people and get it from people that could be even more critical of you in some ways, I think it's very helpful because you can get out of yourself, be outside of yourself and sort of see this in a more, constructive way.
Yeah, I would even add for you guys, if you're trying to get at this, record yourself. Record yourself and watch and see how your body language is. I mean, I was playing volleyball. I take lessons in volleyball. And sometimes I watch I'm like, oh my God, like that's how I hit the ball. But when you're in, you can't see it. And you're like, I need to really work on my footwork. It's always awkward watching yourself do some things sometimes, but that's how you learn. And maybe you'll bring your hands in and not be fidgety and be like, I can't move my hands that much, something. But
Right.
yeah, super helpful. I see some books behind you. I know you're an author. As we wrap up here, talk about the books you've written, and can people just find them anywhere by Googling on Amazon? How do people get hold of
Yeah, actually, that's, believe it or not, that's one book. That's my book. It's Bring Yourself, but it's in like, this is
them?
in Korean, that's in Chinese, that's in
That's
Spanish.
cool.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see that. But it's still sort of pinching myself oftentimes to think, oh, this book is being actually read in other places in the world. So those are all my books. You
Congrats.
can find it on Amazon. Actually, I think that right after we're off, I'm going to send you sort of information about it as well. But it is on Amazon. People can go find me on my website. Actually, something that's as good as the book, in my opinion, is my newsletter because it's very current material where we're sort of addressing subjects that I think that people are really struggling with. And this
Mhm.
month, for example, we did pride versus humility, and we sort of attacked those kinds of subjects that I think people just want to at least think about or know that there's other people thinking about them too. And so the newsletter you can find on my websites on moritaheripour.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm kind of everywhere, but it's a great book, and it's just for people to know. It's not as probably evidenced by the way I was speaking about this today. It's not your typical negotiations book, and it is definitely much more in sort of my life story. But I teach it through stories, and so it reads like a fiction as opposed to just your typical business book. So please, for people who think I don't want to read a negotiations book, I don't like this subject,
Mm.
it doesn't read that way. And so hopefully it makes it more accessible for people and people more open to it. You did mention Dale Carnegie's book, which is actually number one on my syllabus for my students every semester, because I think it's actually to your point, one of the best negotiations book that's ever been written, and it's not even a negotiations book. So
Yeah.
if I've not read it, they should. And if it's been a long time since you read it, remind yourself. I think in this world that we live in today, it's definitely the lessons are actually priceless.
Yeah, I agree. I go back and read it every few years too. And one of my favorite principles is like seek to understand before you seek to be understood. And you're like, that's just so good. We go in with guns blazing a lot, and we're like, I didn't even ask. I didn't even get more information. I didn't even understand. I just, made up my mind before asking any questions. So
Yes.
lots of great nuggets in there for sure.
Well,
Well, thank you so much. This was really helpful for folks. Thanks for talking us through some different ways to think about the negotiation side of things. And I love that about a book. It's the way I best learn is through stories and examples, because that's real life stuff. It's not just theory based. It's like, here are some things that have happened in my life and how you navigate them. And what you said in the beginning, I think was the most important part, that we negotiate every single day. Like, you're already doing this. And yes, we can get better, but it's not just something that belongs in the boardroom.
right, exactly. No, really important. And I think most people are much better at this than they give themselves credit for.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much for your time today. It was nice
So
to see you.
much. This was great.